Okay, so we're going to talk about some different types of angles that are formed when two lines intersect. So first of all, let's look at corresponding angles. So corresponding angles, if you're taking a look at this diagram here, we have two lines and they intersect with a third line. First of all, that third line has a name. That line that intersects the other two lines is called a transversal. Okay, so we have two lines that both intersect with another line. That third line is called the transversal. So when that happens, when we have the transversal that's intersecting the two lines, there are different angles that are formed. And the angles that we're going to talk about are corresponding angles. So you can see they are angles that are on the same side of the two lines and on the same side of the third line that intersects the two lines. Okay, so that sounds kind of confusing, but if I take a look at where the first line intersects with the transversal, I see that there are four angles there. Okay, I like to look at that as top left, top right, bottom right, and bottom left. Same thing happens in the next with the next line where it intersects with the transversal. There's top left, there's top right, there's bottom right, and there's bottom left. Well, what corresponding angles are they're the ones that are in the same spot where the transversal intersects with the line. So in other words, if I'm looking at angle 1, that's the top left angle. That's the angle that's to the left of the transversal and on top of the line. If I'm looking at this other line, the other angle that's in the same spot or the corresponding spot, top left, is angle number 2. So we say that angles 1 and 2 are examples of corresponding angles. So I could do that with any pair of angles that are in the same spot where the transversal intersects with the line. So the ones that are marked 3 and 4, they're also corresponding because they're both in the lower right spot where the transversal intersects with the line. So lower right, where the transversal intersects with the line. So angles 3 and 4 are also considered corresponding angles. Now, looking at this diagram, I can tell that these lines will eventually intersect, which means they're not parallel lines. However, we do know, and later in the course we'll be able to prove, that if the two lines were parallel, then corresponding angles will be congruent. So I'm not going to mark in this particular diagram that the corresponding angles are congruent because these lines are not parallel. However, if these lines were marked parallel with our arrows, then I would say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 and angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. And any pair of corresponding angles, like even this one and this one, they would be congruent, again, only when the lines are parallel, which they're not in this particular case. Next, let's take a look at another type of angle. So again, we have our diagram here with two lines and then a third line that intersects those two lines, again called the transversal. So when we have angles that are between a pair of lines on opposite sides of the transversal, we call those alternate interior angles. So again, the definition sounds a little confusing, but let's make more sense of it. So here are my two lines. So I have a line here, and I have this line here, and I have my transversal, so I'm going to mark that in a different color. Now, those two lines, we can talk about what's on the inside or in between those two lines that I marked with black. That is called the interior. So any angles that are located in between those two lines, again, this line here marked in black and this line marked in black, any angles that are inside or in between those two lines are called interior angles. And on the other hand, anything that's on the opposite sides of those lines, we would call exterior. Exterior sounds like outside. So anything out here, those angles are exterior, and same thing down here. These angles are exterior because they're on the outside of the two lines. So when we're discussing alternate interior angles, we're talking about, we're only focusing on the angles that are on the inside of the two lines. So again, these four angles are on the inside. Now, it has to also be alternate, meaning alternate sides or opposite sides of the transversal. So if I'm looking at the angle here marked X, then I want to stay on the inside of the two lines, but I want to come to the opposite side of the transversal. So the angles that are marked X and Y, those are alternate interior angles, angle X and angle Y. Sometimes it's more easy to identify alternate interior angles if you notice that a Z is formed. So if I use the transversal and part of each of the line, there's a Z formed. And the angles that are on opposite sides of that transversal, those are the two angles that are considered alternate interior. Again, same idea with angles 1 and 2. That's kind of a backward Z, but same idea. One's on the right side of the transversal and two's on the left side of the transversal, but both 1 and 2 are on the interior of those two lines. Therefore, angles 1 and 2 are another example of alternate interior angles. Now, in our diagram, we can tell that the lines are not parallel. However, if they were parallel, then we would be able to say that angles 1 and 2 are congruent, and angles X and Y are congruent. Again, because when we have parallel lines cut by a transversal, alternate interior angles are congruent. I'm not going to mark that on our diagram because our lines were not parallel. Okay, alternate exterior angles. So it is what it sounds like. We have opposite sides of the transversal again, but this time the angles are on the outside. So if you recall in our last diagram, if I add that same information to this diagram, this is the interior of the two lines. This is the exterior. And again, this is the exterior. So this time I still want opposite sides of the transversal. So if I mark my transversal with red, that's my transversal, and I have my two lines that I'll look at just with black. So we have on the inside would be the angles here, but we want to focus on alternate exterior. So we want to focus on the angles that are on the outside of those two lines, but again, still on the opposite sides from one another of the transversal. So I could say that angle 3, because it's on the outside, and angle 6, because it's on the outside but on the other side of the transversal, angles 3 and 6 are alternate exterior angles. Similarly, angle 4 and angle 5 are both on the outside or exterior of the two lines, and they're on opposite sides of the transversal. So angles 4 and 5 are alternate exterior angles. Now, our diagram does not have parallel lines. However, if these two lines were parallel, then we would say that all alternate exterior angles would be congruent. So we'd be marking angles 4 and 5 and angles 3 and 6 as congruent to one another. Again, only when the lines are parallel, which they're not in our particular diagram. Okay, now we're going to practice identifying some different types of angles. So we talked about alternate exterior, alternate interior, and corresponding angles. So we're going to go now to this website. mathwarehouse.com. The link is provided for you on Schoology, so you can just click there. Some information that comes up, we already talked about most of this. So we can scroll down a little bit here. And you can see they give you another visual for identifying the different types of angles we talked about. The same color angles are alternate interior, so the two purples, the two blacks are alternate interior. The two blues are alternate exterior, and the two purples are alternate exterior. And here, the blue corresponds with the blue, the black with the black, the darker purple with the dark purple, and the light purple with light purple. So all of those are pairs of corresponding angles. So we're going to scroll down just a little bit more. We're going to go right here to where it says line P is parallel to line V. So we're going to go ahead and click on the question mark here. Okay, so now it's asking us what are the alternate interior angles. So let's think about that for a moment. Let's think about what are the alternate interior angles. So remember, alternate means opposite sides of the transversal, which is in green here, and interior means on the inside of the two lines. And we were told that these two lines are parallel. So the alternate interior angles, let's find some. I see angle C and angle X. Angle C and X are alternate interior angles because they're on opposite sides of the transversal and they're on the inside of the lines. Also, angle D and angle W are alternate interior angles for the same reason. And we can check ourselves here. Okay. Next, it's asking for alternate exterior. So alternate exterior, the alternate exterior angles are angle B and angle Y because they're on opposite sides of the transversal and they are on the outside of the two lines. And angle Z and A, again for the same reason. So angle Z with angle A, angle B with angle Y. Next, it's asking for corresponding angles. So corresponding angles, remember, when I'm looking at where the line intersects with the transversal, there's four angles that are formed. So angle A corresponds with angle W. Angle A and W are corresponding angles. Similarly, C and Y are in the same spot, so angle C and angle Y are corresponding angles. Angle Z and angle D are corresponding angles. And lastly, angle X and angle B, those are corresponding angles. And we could check to make sure that we have them all, which we do. Okay. So, again, all of those, the three that we just talked about, alternate interior, alternate exterior, and corresponding, they're congruent when the lines are parallel. In the next video, we'll take a look at the angles that are supplementary when the lines are parallel.